Hello, class, and welcome to this week's discussion on volunteers and the grassroots. And I have a on-hand, very hands-on experience with volunteers and the grassroots. So I'm going to give you a slightly different perspective than I think the book and the article that I've assigned do. So I'm going to walk you through that today in this video. That's starting at the end. Let's start at the beginning. So today I'm going to talk about volunteer management briefly, some of the things that weren't really highlighted in your book, then talk about what grassroots means. There's been a lot of definitions of it, and I think we've discussed this earlier once before in this class, how grassroots can mean different things, especially when it comes to like grassroots fundraising is what I would call an individual donor campaign, not really grassroots. We can talk about asset-based community development and some of the concepts that have been coming out of the Northwestern University and the ABCD Institute, that's Asset-Based Community Development Institute in Chicago. Then time banking, which is one of their concepts that they use, although they didn't invent it, and then asset maps, which will be your assignment for the week. Last, we'll talk about the other assignment for the week, which is your peer review of the outline that you did last week. So volunteer management. So a lot of things have been said about volunteer management. I don't know that any of it has any, what I'd call scientific evidence behind it. So all we can do is rely on experience. I have a lot of experience in volunteer management. I've been managing volunteers for a long time, and 20 years, I guess, 22 years professionally, being paid to manage volunteers. And these are the three rules that I usually tell people who I'm training to do volunteer management with me. First one is train the volunteer supervisor. Whenever you have a large group of volunteers, you can't supervise all of them. So you need to have a volunteer supervisor to supervise the other volunteers. This person is usually also a volunteer, but this person requires a little bit more training. It requires a little bit of insight into how to manage volunteers and the good, bad, and the ugly of volunteer management. The second rule is you need to have enough work. That takes a lot of time on your part, all right? So, for example, don't have one person who has a computer and all the other people just sort of hang around looking at them. You need to have too much work, which is a strategic nightmare, really. The really great thing about volunteers is you're getting a lot of valuable energy and oftentimes skills that people in your office just don't have: time, resources, and skills, right? The bad thing is that if they're bored, they're not going to come back. If they feel like you're wasting their time, they're not going to come back. So always prepare, I say, twice as much work as you think you have volunteers for. If you don't get it all done, fine. Right? But have enough work so that they feel like there is a compelling need for them to be there, and then they'll come back next time. All right. That takes a long time. Preparing work for volunteers takes almost as much time as volunteering itself, but you can get a lot of work done and use your time really effectively by spending the time to prepare good work for volunteers to do. Also, I would advise that you always brief. That means do a brief training beforehand and debrief every shift. At the end of every shift, this is the hard one because volunteers want to sort of cut out. They're like, oh, I did my duty and I feel great and I want to go. But you really need to have some opportunity to debrief before they leave while the memory is still fresh, to talk about what's going on, what was good, what was bad, and make sure that you ask them to come back, right? And always try and get them back in the door and bring their friends. So always brief and debrief. Those three rules can go a long way. Just following those three rules can go a long way toward helping you manage volunteers at any level with any organization anywhere in the world. Next, what is grassroots? There's been a lot of definitions of grassroots, and a lot of them I think are complete bunk. Grassroots is meant to say that there's something about this organization or this movement that's coming out of the bottom, right? The people at the bottom of the organization, the people who are most affected are the ones who are doing it. In other words, individuals in a community are empowered to serve themselves. It is a non-financial resource. It's a resource that you can look to that is not money, right? So it's harder for nonprofits who've been more and more trained within the business sector to really think about it as a resource. It's sustainable insofar as this resource, grassroots energy, is in the community. So if the community that you're helping is also empowered to serve themselves, well, that's eventually that could take over and you wouldn't be necessary anymore, right? It's part of that movement that nonprofits have toward working themselves out of the business, as they say. And it's more than longer term. It can be indefinite. Some of the grassroots programming that I set up in Washington, D.C. is ongoing to this day, even though I haven't been there in 7 years. It's much harder to manage. And one of the reasons is because you can't really manage it. You can just give people the tools to manage themselves. So you don't have a lot of control, right? Grants and other funders really like control. They want to know that what's happening at the grassroots level, that what's happening with their money is exactly what they're spending their money and they want to happen. The problem is that when it's truly a grassroots run organization or a grassroots empowering organization, the people at the grassroots aren't going to necessarily want to do what the wealthy people at the top want them to do, right? Who are giving them money. So there's a lot of challenges that come with that. And one of the ways to manage those challenges is the asset-based community development, which I was talking about earlier. The ABCD Institute is still in Chicago. They used to be at the University of Chicago. I think they've moved to Northwestern, although I could be wrong. But they're still there. They want to go into a community and create the foundation for a real grassroots movement by focusing on assets within that community rather than deficits. So they look at the community, and the first thing they analyze is not what does this community need, but what does this community have, right? And it really is based on geographical communities. It's based on an area that you can serve rather than an individual organization. So your organization, as an asset-based community development organization, if you were to follow that model, would really be focused on a community and serving that geography, regardless of where that geography took you, regardless of where the community there took you. And the last thing is it really focuses on building that community's capacity. Mostly social capital, but also financial capital and everything else, so that that community can care for, motivate, and do their own work. And part of this is time banking, right? So when we think about volunteerism, oftentimes what we think about is having somebody in for 2 hours and then they leave and we try and get as much work out of them as we can. Time banking is an idea that has been circulating in several cities where you join usually it's a website, but sometimes it's other methods of tracking your time. A lawyer will come in and will give 2 hours to a nonprofit to help them with their foundational documents or rewrite their bylaws, and bank that time into the system. And then in exchange, that lawyer can then request a plumber who will come into his house for 2 hours and fix his bathtub. And then that plumber could request a car mechanic to fix their car. And the car mechanic might want a lawyer. And then the lawyer can come back in. And so each hour counts as 1 hour. And everybody within the system will give as much time or as little time as they have into this time bank. And you can volunteer for a nonprofit, right, and bank some of your time there and then pull that out from a for-profit organization. Time banking has been an interesting tool, and you can use it in that sort of large social level like I was just talking about, but you can also use it on sort of a smaller volunteer level within your organization. In other words, you can really closely keep track of the exact time that the volunteers are putting into your organization, and you can discuss it as an asset in a very real and concrete way that grantors understand. So look at some of the time banking apps and some of the time banking literature if you're interested in using volunteerism in a way that can help you to bring in larger donors. It's a way to make larger donors and grantors rethink how they look at volunteerism and grassroots efforts. In other words, they still have less control of it, but if you can use time banking as an outcome, an output, way of measuring what you're doing, then you can talk their language a little bit and bring them together with more of a grassroots movement. So asset mapping, and this is your assignment for today, is about figuring out where you, and what I mean by that is your organization, your nonprofit that you're managing is in the scheme of the community, in the overlapping communities. And the basic idea is that when you first go into a community, and you can, even if your nonprofit has been in the community for ages, you can still take a step back and decide, look, we need to focus more on the assets within this community. And ABCD has given us a very cool tool for doing that. The asset map. In the organizational asset map, you focus on things like personnel. What sort of personnel do you have? What sort of educational abilities do they have? What sort of individual abilities? What sort of traits and training? What about their networks, not just of people, but also of knowledge and leadership development? How can they pull in more people into your organization? The educational thing's really interesting. We don't often think about our staff as people who have skills that they could use to enter and gain trust in a community, but of course they do. All of them have hobbies and other things that they do, and we can use the more complete person for our staff and ourselves. Constituents are your organization's beneficiaries, whoever that might be, including volunteers. Volunteers are beneficiaries because volunteers are looking for places that they can go to feel better about their world and the impact that they're having on it, right? Space and facilities. You might have space that goes, meeting room, for example, that goes unused 90% of the time. Well, why could you not open that up to the community? Well, it would take a little work and other things, but it's an asset that you have. And your expertise that you have within your organization looks a lot like your personnel section. You also have networks of connections between nonprofits, governments, all kinds of things. These you obviously can use for your own organization, but oftentimes you can strengthen those networks by also getting other folks within the community access to those networks, especially your beneficiary communities. You have materials and equipment such as computers and bicycles, all kinds of things that you have as a nonprofit that could probably come in useful for the other people in your community. Maybe just a printer, right? And some paper, I don't know. And you have economic power. You have the ability to hire, do job training. You have, as a nonprofit, you have the ability to bring certain people in or keep certain people out of the neighborhood by just how you do your business. And that goes back to the concept that I'm finding in some of my studies that show that that nonprofits can bring in people who commit crimes, right? And this is all about rethinking your organization, not as a lockbox that you have to protect and have to utilize to do your work and meet your mission. That's important. Meeting your mission is obviously important. But you might find that if you think of your organization and all of its resources as a treasure chest for your community, instead of a lockbox, that your community will start to embrace the nonprofit more heavily. And as they do that, you'll get more resources. So it's this self-fulfilling this circuit where you create more and more resources. The more you let those resources go into the community, the more resources you get. And that's by trusting that your community is a valuable community. It's a community that has lots of wealth, whether or not that wealth is money or or other resources, right? And a lot of our nonprofits serve poor communities. Those are wealthy communities. What we call poor communities are also wealthy communities. It's just that their wealth is not the traditional wealth that we normally think of in nonprofit work. So I encourage you to think of that as hidden wealth communities, and go out and find that hidden wealth. And one of the best ways to find that hidden wealth is by offering your own hidden wealth, to unleash it, to unlock it. It's a beautiful concept. It's very optimistic, and it's a lot of fun. It might be too optimistic, but I think it really is a genuine, in my experience, when you go out there and start unlocking your assets that you have and sharing them with the community, then the community shares back. And then the community asset map is what you'll be doing today. You're going to place your organization in the center of a geographical space, and you're going to try and find associations in your community that are assets for your organization, institutions in your community that are assets for your organization and your community, individuals that are assets for the community, physical space that are assets for your community, and local economic things like for-profit businesses, credit unions, groups of merchants. That'll be sometimes like a business, what do you call it, a business organization, business bureau. So all these things are assets that your community has, and as a result you have, because now you're running a treasure chest, right? Instead of a locked box, you're now running a treasure chest where your nonprofit is sharing with the community. And because the community assets are now your assets, you can unlock all of these assets, and all of these assets come into your nonprofit as well. This is where it gets really grassrootsy. Right? This is where we are empowering people to help themselves by connecting to all these different assets, making use of them to benefit your own organization, and in benefiting your own organization to benefit your community. This is where the synergy really starts to happen. And that's why I'm having you do a community asset map today of a nonprofit of your choice. It can be so the types of community assets include like what we just talked about, associations such as religious groups, women's groups, business groups, institutions such as schools, hospitals, libraries, and nonprofits, individuals such as youth, people with disabilities, activists, and veterans. Physical space is so important, and we often forget about it as an asset for a nonprofit organization. But parks, playgrounds, natural habitat, acres of land, all matter. They all are opportunities for us to make use of these assets and share them with the community at the same time. Local economy like businesses, banks, tourists, and as I mentioned, business bureaus. And like I said, this map, this week you'll be doing a community asset map. And I want you to first of all, find assets. Pick a nonprofit. It can be the one you work for. It can be the imaginary one you're creating. It can be just one out of the blue. It could be the Auraria. I've had people do it before where they use the Auraria campus as the asset, as the nonprofit asset. And the Auraria campus, I believe Auraria is in fact a nonprofit. CCD, UCD, Metro are not, but Auraria, the campus, is, I believe, a nonprofit initiative. So you can use that or any number of things. Think about the geography. Try and situate that nonprofit within its geography, and then find at least, I believe it's 20 assets, so 4 in each category. And I'm going to give you 3 points for each as you look. So find those assets. Think about them. Think about how you can use them. List them somehow. Be creative. Not just creatively think about the assets, but show them in a creative way. You could use a Prezi like this to show your different assets. You could use a PowerPoint slide or a video, anything. I'm leaving it up to you as long as it's a digital format that you can send it to me. And then answer these 3 questions in that same presentation or Excel spreadsheet or Word document, however you're doing it. Answer these 3 questions. What are these assets in this community that your nonprofit can use? Okay. What assets in this community can save your nonprofit resources? and what assets in your community can do something that you simply can't do with money. What about this community? I want you to find at least one thing in your community that community-based effort would be able to bring out that you cannot do with money, that money could never buy. All right, that's the hard one. So think long and hard about it, and really try and put it together. This week, I've got you're going to be doing peer reviews on the outlines from last week. They are automatically assigned by the computer. That might not go well. So if I've never done it that the computer automatically assigns it, I like how fair it is, but I don't know if it's going to, and by fair I mean random, but I don't know how it's going to work. So I'm going to try and keep a close eye on it. If there are problems, if you only get one peer review instead of two, let me know and I will try and figure out what's going on. I left a peer review sheet for you to fill out so you can answer a certain number of questions about the outline that will help, I think, will help the person getting the peer review to feel, to write a better final assignment for this course. Especially with your input and my input all put together. Hopefully they have enough input to really write a good final assignment for this course, and hopefully then you will have enough input to write a great final assignment for this course. That final project is coming up in a couple of weeks, 2, I believe now. We have 1 more week after this of coursework. No, 2 more weeks of coursework. So 3 weeks till the final project is due. So you have time. But still, it's good to start really contemplating, thinking about it, and thinking deeply. So we have next week, we'll talk about race, gender, and religion in nonprofits. It's interesting topic, and it's going to be sensitive, and we'll have a lot of fun, I think, on the discussion boards. So let's try and open up our minds and be brave about it and really do some good digging next week. And then after that, we do a wrap up, and then there's a week off for finals week where all you have to do is write your papers. So most of your work is now complete except that final project. All right, and the final project, the biggest thing about the final project is structure. Make sure you have really good headings. Your budget, fix your budget from the comments that I gave you from this week, and then make sure you have really good headings so that you can structure that final project in a clear and concise and cohesive way, so as to get yourself the best grade possible, but also to give yourself the best understanding of what a really good nonprofit plan looks like. All right, I'm going to be correcting it and doing some edits on it, even though you might not look at it, just so that you can have a good idea of what a nonprofit plan, how it should be written, so that in case you have to write a similar document in your work, which I hope you will, you'll have some ideas on how that should be written. And as always, please Zoom in. I'll be around on Monday, 11 to 1 at the Zoom number, 309-203-22332. Or you can call or text me, 970-236-6311. I get a lot of texts every week, and I'm really liking that feedback and those interactions. So please call or text. Thanks a lot. See you next week. Ciao.